Hello, everyone. Our apologies for being a couple minutes late due to technical difficulties. We're on now with David Wilhelm, and I think most of you know me. I'm Howard Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Center. I know all of us must feel like we've been on an emotional roller coaster over the last 3 days, over the last 3 weeks, and over the last 8 months or so. Hopefully today, with my good friend and colleague, David Wilhelm, the chair of the board of the Environmental Law and Policy Center Action Fund, we're going to be able to give you some suggestions on what the elections results mean for the Midwest environment, clean energy, and climate change. Just a couple of personal words at the beginning. We live in two Americas. That's become painfully clear to all of us when it comes to policy, when it comes to politics, when it comes to core values. When it comes to racial justice and racial injustice and racial equality, when it comes to geography. I'm given hope as Vice President Biden is talking about how important it will be to bring the country together. Indeed, I think it is. And around core values like healthier, clean air for everyone, safe, clean water for everyone to drink, people's right to live in communities without toxics. We hope that these will become common values, and they'll be something that will be able to bring people together, both Republicans and Democrats and people in rural areas, suburban areas, and urban areas, to get some real progress done. So I'm a little bit optimistic for the future, in part because when it comes to protecting safe, clean drinking water in the Great Lakes, that really is a shared value around the Midwest. It's something that's held by a lot of people. And finally, I'm optimistic that we're going to have an administration that isn't every week seeking to overturn and reverse and roll back the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the other core environmental statutes, but we'll have an administration that we can work together with to try to move environmental progress and economic growth together. That's an optimistic view looking forward, and I think we need to bring people together and find a way to get that done. Let me turn to David Wilhelm. David is a longtime political strategist and consultant that goes back to being the youngest chair ever of the DNC, was campaign manager for Bill Clinton, for Mayor Daley. David has been working now for Hecti Energy doing solar development, is their chief strategy officer. David's chair of the Environmental Law and Policy Center Action Funds board, and he's a wonderful friend and a colleague. David, ball to you. Tell us what this all means, okay?
Right. Well, thanks, Howard, and thanks for those comments. Very, very well said. Well, here's the good news. The outlaw has been defeated. The White House has been flipped. Sanity is going to be restored to the highest office in the land. And the blue wall, the Midwestern blue wall, plus Pennsylvania, has been restored. And 2 of the 6 remaining true battlegrounds went our way. So 306 electoral college votes, as thin as the margins may be, are nothing to sneeze at. And they should shut down, or not shut down, mitigate any remaining furtive attempts to seal the election. For the first time since the early 1800s, one party, the Democratic Party, has had the popular vote edge in 7 of 8 elections. That is a serious fact in our favor. For only the 4th time in American history, a sitting president running for re-election has been defeated. And that is no small achievement. The power of incumbency is ginormous. And I think 4 years ago, we talked about the Alan Lichtman book, The 13 Keys to the Presidency, where 3 of his keys are proxies of sort for incumbency. This year, his 13 keys split 7-6 for Biden, presaging a very close race. A new Democratic map has begun to emerge with a toehold in the Confederacy, with Georgia and North Carolina soon to follow in future years, and real strength in the Southwest. Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, Texas, not far behind. So a very different and changing electoral college map is being written in front of our very eyes. Ron Brownstein wrote of Hillary Clinton that she ran at a time when the traditional industrial Democratic coalition in the Midwest had collapsed, but before the new Democratic coalition of states like Arizona and Georgia had emerged. Well, here we are 4 years later, and the blue wall has been restored. So some part of that traditional Midwestern coalition has been restored. And the new Democratic coalition in the Southwest even in the Confederacy has begun to come about. And while we hoped for more wins in the United States Senate, I think that a fair way to think about it is that we didn't topple incumbents that we thought we had a chance at toppling in red states. That didn't happen. But we continued to gain ground in the emerging Democratic battlegrounds. Hickenlooper in Colorado, Mark Kelly in Arizona, the Georgia race is still in play. North Carolina was very close. Only Susan Collins really bucked the trend of results that were consistent with the basic partisan divide. And she is a tough politician. So we didn't gain Senate seats in red states, but where the battleground states of the country exist, we did quite well. Thank you very much. Now, some of the not so good news. We won by the hair of our chinny chin chin. This was not the rebuke that we hoped for, that I and many others hoped for, and that we sort of expected. Indeed, in many ways, when contrasted to 2016, it was deja vu all over again. It was Groundhog Day. That these results are very similar to 2016. Donald Trump may have been defeated, but Trumpism lives on. The realigning event did not occur. The governing mandate was not provided. A more unified America did not emerge. That is going to need more time. And as Howard pointed out, it will need to be achieved through governance. Joe Biden must truly be a president for all Americans and show those who voted against him what that means. We'll lose a few seats in the House, but given the partisan divide, we hung on to the vast majority of seats that we won in 2018. We did not fare well in state legislatures across the country, and we will pay a price in terms of the continued ability of Republicans to gerrymander. The rural vote was amazing in its absolute rejection of Biden and all things Democratic. Oh my God. All across the ELCP states, every single one. One of the most frightening maps I've ever seen is a county by county breakdown of this election in the state of Ohio. Donald Trump received vote share in the high 70s, even the low 80s in rural counties. I don't care how strong we are in Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati. If we are getting crushed by margins like that in the 40% of the state that is rural, we are never going to win another statewide election soon. I think Iowa saw results very, very similar to this. People smarter than I am will opine about where things went wrong in polling, but my gut tells me that white rural males have become impossible to poll, impossible to reach, and when reached, view pollsters as creatures of the deep state. And it's worth saying that polls should be reduced in status. They are only one factor of many worth considering and putting strategy together. Past election results, party identification, economic performance in a given state all matter. And when I was doing the Electoral College strategy for Bill Clinton way back when, we did not rely on polling to the exclusion of all else, and I think we benefited from that. The second-tier cities of the Midwest, that where really Democratic performance collapsed 4 years ago, the Toledos, the Youngstowns, the Daytons, they haven't collapsed the way rural counties have collapsed, but we actually lost more votes there this time around. I hoped for the fact is that the 2020 electorate was more conservative than the 2016 electorate. It was more Christian than the 2016 electorate. I hoped for a large shift in the vote preference of seniors, and while there might have been slight gains, I think it was slight, pretty slight. And while there might have been a slight gain in suburbs, I think that those gains came in the type of suburb I live in, that is upper middle class, highly educated, and that taxes itself to death to support local schools. And even then, it was hard. I think it's hard to see in the Midwest much of a shift in suburban communities. Where we killed it, counties with universities. We killed it throughout the Midwest in those sorts of counties. The Lincoln Project had a bad election. More Republicans stayed loyal to Trump in 2020, 93%, than in 2016. So this was a turnout election. And when we go back and look at the strategies, one wonders whether the gazillions of dollars that was spent on television, persuasion television, was really worth it. I think we need to roll up our sleeves, get back to work, and do the hard work of registering people, turning them out, talking to them at their homes. It's hard to do that this year, but 4 years from now, God willing, we won't have that excuse. So what does this mean for the ELPC and its geography? The blue wall was reinstated, so the upper Midwest is still going to be of supreme importance on the national scene. But Iowa and Ohio took a real hit, and they are increasingly looking like Indiana electorally. It pains me to say it, but there needs to be a real project. And it's not going to pay off in 10 years, in 2 years. It's going to pay off in 10 years. But if we don't do it, states like Ohio and Iowa are going to quickly fall off the competitive landscape. I think this was a good election for natural gas, for the notion that there needs to be an energy transition to a renewable clean energy world as opposed to a huge energy transformation, that strategies like blue and green hydrogen that utilize natural gas as a feedstock are likely to get much greater emphasis. Solar and wind continue to be very interesting politically because they represent a good news story in rural parts of the country. Integrated energy hubs that combine renewables with natural gas strategies are going to get a hard look. Clean water is an issue that affects rural parts of the Midwest, going to be more important than ever. The power of local action was reiterated. The city of Columbus passed community aggregation for the purposes of renewable energy by a margin of 78 to 22. So anyway, we who care about this stuff need an explicit rural message, and it is renewable energy, clean water, as Howard pointed out, is a huge piece of the strategy to get these folks back. So the urban-rural divide is widening. The absolute moral position that we're in as a country is that instead of doubling down on the divide, we need to unify our country and truly serve all. We know that that's what ELPC is all about. We know that that's what Joe Biden is all about. And so while the nation has been saved from the worst possible outcome, there is much, much work that is left to be done. So Howard, that's it.
David, Wilhelm, thank you as always for your savvy judgment and for all you do that makes a difference in the world. There are a lot of questions lined up. David, let me throw a couple of them over to you. Why don't you get going on them? And then there are a couple that people are addressing to me. Talk a little bit about what you would, about the parallels between Midwest conservatism and the huge growth of renewable energy. Is that an opportunity here in terms of independent local power to bring on board some of the rural, more conservative people? Mark Berger is asking that question.
Well, I think it's a huge piece of the puzzle to do that. And I look at my own experience in Appalachian, Ohio, where my company has been developing a large-scale, utility-scale solar project in deep southern Ohio, right in the middle of the counties that went 78, 80, 81% for Donald Trump. But because of our solar projects, and they're not, they've been approved. We're doing all the development. The financing is in place. They've been approved from a regulatory standpoint. But what people haven't seen yet in deep southern Ohio are the jobs that are going to be created, and they haven't seen the revenues to the school districts yet. And these projects, from an economic development standpoint, in counties that have been totally down on their luck, is absolutely transformational. School districts that didn't have two dimes to rub together will now have money. People that didn't know where the next job was going to come from will now have some jobs. It's a huge, huge deal. So, and it's not just our project. Literally, southern and southwestern Ohio is bursting at the seams with new solar projects. So it's one of the answers. It's not the only answer, but it is a way of connecting a clean energy agenda to the hopes and aspirations of the people there. People are getting their heads around it. It hasn't always been easy. There's a need to be respectful of the energy past, but people want a stake in the energy future. And solar represents that. Wind represents that in states like Iowa. So I do think it's one of the key aspects that we're going to get people back on.
David, a couple of comments that people made and a couple things I'll respond to, then throw a couple back to you. Ross Capon, longtime rail passenger advocate, points out, I think quite correctly, that Susan Collins, reelected in Maine, likely chair of transportation over in the Senate, strong rail passenger advocate, who we can probably work with quite well on those issues. A couple of good comments from people about opportunities going forward on both clean energy front and some of the challenges with it. A couple questions from Rich Quansker and others. What is a Biden administration likely to do very quickly on the environment? I think Vice President Biden's made very clear that day one, he'll put us back in the Paris Accord. That's something that can be done. It's a day one action, and I think that one has been signaled pretty clearly. There's also a fair number of environmental rollbacks by the Trump administration. I'm not sure if they're day one, but they are clearly intended to be reversed pretty early in a hoped-for Biden administration. So I think you're going to see a lot of action very quickly. There have been people who have been working on that for quite a while. And this is an administration with Vice President Biden, if he becomes president, a tremendous amount of experience. He knows what the office of the presidency is, and I think he'll have a game plan to move very quickly on environmental and energy issues, as well as a number of other areas, and we'll hear that quickly. David, question to you from a number of folks, but Jerry Burren in particular. Ohio and Iowa voted for Barack Obama, 2008. What's happened? How have they changed?
They have changed since 2008 and 2012 in terms of something resembling a collapse of votes in the rural parts of those states. And I know Ohio better than I know Iowa. What I call second-tier cities that were formerly manufacturing centers. So the Youngstowns, the Lorains, the Toledos, the Daytons, the collapse is not too strong a term. I mean, 40% of the vote in the state of Ohio is rural. And those of us who live in places like Columbus, national Democratic consultants that live in Washington, D.C., tend to forget that. And we just have not, I mean, part of the problem is you got to show up, and we have simply not engaged there. Really, I don't think very effectively since 2008. Barack Obama had a very aggressive campaign in the rural parts of the Midwest. But something has changed dramatically when you look at the turnout of rural whites, when you look at the percentage of vote that Donald Trump has garnered. And it brings me back to a scatter plot that I saw that The Economist magazine ran 4 years ago, where they were trying to look at what variable best explains the increase in Trump vote in 2016 over the Romney vote by county in rural America. And the factor that best explained it was the health status of a given county. In other words, the more the suicides, the more the drug abuse, the more the opioid abuse, the lower the life expectancy, the greater the increase in Trump's numbers. So there are really, rural whites have declining, rural white males have sharply, I don't have the numbers in front of me, declining life expectancy. There are real issues, and there's something going on culturally that represents almost a primal scream of rural rights who have lost their status, blame others for it, in many cases are sick and tired. And I think there's something going on there. And I don't think that's all that different in the second tier cities where we've lost. So there have been these dramatic vote declines in Iowa and Ohio that are tough to get back. And I also, somebody told me once, and I always remembered this, said, well, he was talking about young people at the time. If somebody votes in one election as a Democrat, and then in the next election as a Democrat, and then in the next election as a Democrat, pretty soon they're a Democrat. And I think in rural America, they vote Republican. The next election you voted Republican. The next election you voted Republican. Pretty soon you're a Republican. And
Dave, let's shift from that to what happened in the cities. I mean, African-American Black voters turned out in Milwaukee and Detroit And as we're seeing now in Atlanta and Philadelphia, in the cities in much larger numbers than they voted in 2016. And the increased vote in Milwaukee, in Detroit, the other urban cities, particularly by people of color, is indeed making a difference for Biden's election and for prevailing in states like Wisconsin that are very close. I think the recent numbers I saw in Wisconsin were about 20,000, 21,000 votes. We're all looking at the Georgia numbers of being, quite narrow. Talk a little bit about the urban turnout, people of color, particularly Black voters in the major cities in the Midwest and elsewhere.
Well, definitely a key part of the story. And I think there were lessons learned from 2016 in terms of the importance of getting out to vote. I think that Joe Biden ran a campaign, and for that matter, Donald Trump ran a campaign that helped trigger that turnout. But in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, in order to win them, a lot of pieces of the puzzle need to come together. And the Black vote is one of them. But in some of the numbers that I saw in Wisconsin, you're right. I think there was an additional 20,000 people that came out of the Black community. I think there was an additional 30,000 that came out from what are called university and university related. So, the Black vote, it's such an obvious statement to make. Without it, there are no victories. The white vote, left to its own devices, would lead to the election of Donald Trump. That is absolutely true in the Midwest, but these changes, even on the margin of 20,000 in the state of Wisconsin, are absolutely essential. And when fitted together with other pieces of the puzzle, lead to a win, a small win, but a win nonetheless.
And what that says, at least from the Environmental Law and Policy Center on environmental issues, we need to be really doing a both and. We need to be working when it comes to healthier, clean air and safe, clean drinking water with people of color in environmental justice communities that are largely in the urban areas, while at the same time be working on safe, clean water and clean energy development and other issues more intensively in rural areas. In some ways, people look at it as an either or.
Right.
I think if there's anything this election has showed us is it absolutely for the environmental community needs to be a both and. We need it together. It's a matter of healthy, clean air for all. It's safe, clean drinking water for everybody and everybody living in healthy communities. There have been a number of questions people have been asking about, for example, carbon pricing. Is the Biden administration likely to go toward carbon pricing? Personally, I don't think so. There's a lot of interest among policy people on carbon pricing. Threading that needle in terms of public policy in Washington, it's proven to be much more of a successful policy initiative than it has been one that actually gets votes. And until we see Republicans in Congress truly embracing carbon pricing, I think it's going to be difficult for an administration to move there directly. There are a lot of things that an administration can do indirectly, price of carbon, and that can make a difference. There have been some questions asked about working on the Ohio River. And I know, David, you have something, David, to say about carbon pricing. Go for it. And then I'll turn to the Ohio River.
I'm just saying that I tried to make the argument that I think we're going to be, as a country, and I think the Biden administration the notion that there's going to be some grand, you know, the greatest aspirations, perhaps, of the clean energy and the environmental community were not realized in this election. They just weren't, and it makes me, you know, if we're smart about this moment, we will pursue the kind of strategy that that Howard articulated, which is a strategy that has great meaning in urban communities when it comes to environmental justice, great meaning when it comes to rural parts of the country, when it comes to their economic growth opportunities, great meaning in areas like the Ohio River Valley, which continues to be absolutely critical from an electoral college point of view, Western Pennsylvania. And things like, you know, the Biden campaign, if you had any connection to a natural gas, the natural gas industry or utility, you could not give money to the Biden campaign. I personally think that's semi-crazy. Now, you may call me not a good environmentalist for saying that, but I think that we are going into a period of time where there are great opportunities for the clean energy and environmental community, but we need to pick our shots. They need to be consistent with the political reality that this election presents us. And if we do that, we're going to be absolutely critical to the success of the Biden administration.
David, not only do I think you're a very good environmentalist, I do not think you're crazy. Hey, a couple of questions people are asking, and I'm just going to, you know, comment on them in some cases, and David may want to, you know, add some thoughts as well. Question about Ohio River. You know, what can be done to clean up the Ohio River? We're talking about agricultural runoff pollution. Ohio River, hardest working river in America. You know, it's also one of the most polluted rivers in America. And that ought to be a priority of the next administration, how to step up and how the environmental community can work with the new EPA that we're hopefully going to see to make serious progress in terms of cleaning up the Ohio River. The geography, I think some of you all know, but in case you haven't looked at the map recently, begins at Three Rivers up in Pittsburgh, you know, so Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, before the Ohio River feeds into the Mississippi. You know, we're dealing with a regional river, a regional water body. Been a lot of focus from the environmental community on cleaning up the Mississippi River, an enormous amount on the Great Lakes. We've been saying for a while, as Rick Kogan knows, it really is time to focus much more on cleaning up the Ohio River, and that fits in very much with the sort of message that Vice President Biden and likely President-elect Biden has been talking about. It's a good opportunity for the communities to get together and work in a positive way going forward. Some questions about, go ahead, David.
If I can jump, it's an area for bipartisan work. Mitch McConnell is from Kentucky. He cares about the Ohio River. Western PA, absolutely essential to Joe Biden. I think this can be a golden period for the Ohio River Valley if we play our cards right, and opportunities related to cleanup of the Ohio River, redeveloping the infrastructure associated with the Ohio River, broadband in states adjacent to the Ohio River, clean energy strategies linking, you know, let's make the Ohio River Valley a hydrogen valley. I don't know. There are a lot. This can be a golden period for the Ohio River Valley.
Yeah. When it comes to reducing agricultural runoff pollution, David, you know, I think we've gotten to a point now where it's got to be a both and. For many, many years, through the Farm Bill and other things, people have been talking about voluntary practices. You know, that give farmers incentives to reduce the amount of fertilizer runoff, the amount of manure runoff from CAFOs. The fact of the matter is the voluntary measures aren't enough. They're not working. Western Lake Erie, recurring toxic algae outbreaks. We need a combination of the regulatory side along with the voluntary side. That's if we want to have serious progress, whether it's the Ohio River or whether it's Lake Erie in Ohio. A couple of questions, David, about media. We talked about two Americas before. Clearly, we have two Americas when it comes to where do people get their information. Brian Urbaszewski asked the question about Sinclair Broadcasting, the polarization of media, where people are hearing their news in rural areas and urban areas. How do we get our message out? How do we get people, as my wife Lauren Rosenthal points out, people focusing around a common set of facts?
Well, I'm not sure I have all the. I'm relatively certain I don't have all the. Here's what I think I know. It bothers me that in the state of Ohio, and I get it because the state of Ohio in this past election, should it have been in play at all? The Biden campaign really didn't make a commitment to Ohio until the very, very end. And at the very, very end, plowed money onto television because at the very, very end, there's really nothing else you can do. And I think that in the last weekend of the election, the Biden campaign and related organizations had 4,000 gross rating points on television in support of Joe Biden. That's crazy. I mean, you might as well light a match to the money and put it in the fireplace. I think we need face-to-face, door-to-door, much deeper conversations with people. And I am not a community organizer enough to know all the techniques that really come into play, but I'm pretty darn sure that when you know that people are so set in their ways, in their opinions, that you've got to do things that either boost turnout or you've got to have real much deeper communication with people to try to change their hearts and minds. So I think that's Project A coming out of this election, is to try to figure out the answer to that question.
Hey, David, we're moving toward wrap up, but I want to just get your reaction on one point. We've seen around energy issues rampant political corruption in Ohio. The Ohio speaker, the former Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, has been indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for charges of racketeering. 4 lobbyists from some of the energy companies, First Energy and others. In Illinois, we've certainly seen the U.S. Attorney bringing an action against Commonwealth Edison, to which it entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. We've been saying around the LPC that if you want to have clean energy, we have to have clean government. I mean, how do you see that playing out in places like Ohio and Illinois and also Wisconsin, where there's some issues that have been raised regarding ex parte communications and questions about corruption?
Well, in Ohio, Larry Householder was reelected with 70% of the vote, and the Ohio Republican House expanded its already humongous majority. So it would be hard to conclude from the results in Ohio that it had much of an impact on this this particular election. But I don't think. I think this election was about Donald Trump, and what we're seeing is that people are voting their partisan identification almost exclusively. There's very little decline or difference between how you voted president and how you vote for state rep. It's just the way things are right now. But obviously, as a matter of policy, as a matter of philosophy, as a matter of clean energy and clean government ought to go together. But at least my honest answer here in Ohio is it's hard to draw any conclusion that really mattered in the last election.
Okay. We need to move to wrap up. A number of comments from Damon Watson, Jan Buder, Peter Bauer, and others. Sorry that we can't get to them more directly. I think, though, having looked at your chat notes, one way or the other, David or I probably did get to them and address them. So first of all, thank you to everybody who joined us today. We really look forward to working with you going forward to making a difference around healthier, clean air, safe, clean drinking water, and communities without toxics for all across the Midwest, in our urban cities and in our rural areas. This is an opportunity for us all to engage, and I hope we're going to be looking at an administration that each week is moving forward with something that does good things for the environment, as opposed to what we've had over the last 4 years. Every week, once or twice, we're looking at rollbacks when it comes to basic core environmental protections. I'm not namby-pamby about what needs to be done to move change, but that is a very different framing moving forward, and some optimism about opportunities for progress going forward. And thank you very much to David Wilhelm, my friend, colleague, leader, ELPC Action Fund Board Chair. You're going to hear much more about the ELPC Action Fund, our sister 501c4 organization. As some of you may know, in 2017, we retained Ann Selzer. Ann does the Iowa poll for the Des Moines Register. 538's referred to her as the best darn pollster in America. Ann is very, very good. We're going to talk with Ann about engaging with us again to really get to understanding what people are thinking about these core environmental issues, starting in the spring of 2021 and moving forward. So something to look ahead to. Thank you, David, for joining us and all you've said. Always good. And thank you all for what you're going to be doing. All righty. See you soon.
Thanks, Howard.